An immigrant shared her umbrella with a stranger, unaware that kindness would reunite her family. The thought floated through Maylene's mind like a distant memory as she stood beneath the steady patter of rain, her small red umbrella the only splash of color on the dreary New York street. 4 years in America, and still the city felt as foreign as the day she'd arrived, a labyrinth of towering buildings and unfamiliar faces that never quite became home. The rain fell harder now, drumming against the taut fabric above her head. Maylene clutched the worn handle tighter, her knuckles whitening around the faded wood. It was one of the few possessions she'd brought from Fuzhou, a gift from her mother on the morning of her departure. The memory of her mother's tearful goodbye sent a familiar ache spreading through her chest. 4 years since she'd seen her family. 4 years of working double shifts at the restaurant, of sending money home each month, of waiting for immigration paperwork that seemed perpetually stalled. Thunder rumbled overhead as Maylene waited for the crosswalk signal. The rain transformed the city into a blur of muted grays and blacks, headlights reflecting in puddles that rippled with each heavy drop. Her apartment was still 20 minutes away by foot, but the subway fare was a luxury she couldn't justify tonight. Not after her hours had been cut again. A gust of wind nearly tore the umbrella from her grasp. As she tightened her grip, she noticed a man at the corner. Tall, middle-aged, with silver threading through his dark hair. He wore no coat, his white button-down already soaked through, clinging to his shoulders. He held a briefcase over his head in a futile attempt to stay dry, his eyes squinting against the downpour. Maylene hesitated. The umbrella barely covered her own small frame. And yet, the crosswalk signal changed. People surged forward around her, a river of black umbrellas and hurried footsteps. The man stepped off the curb, water already pooling in his leather shoes. She didn't plan it, didn't think it through. Maylene simply stepped beside him, raising her umbrella higher to shelter them both. "Share?" she offered, her accent thick around the single English word. Surprise flickered across his face, then gratitude. He nodded, ducking slightly to fit beneath the small canopy of red fabric. "Thank you," he said, his voice deep and worn at the edges. "That's very kind." They walked in silence, an awkward dance of strangers trying to match their strides. He was much taller, forcing Maylene to hold the umbrella at an uncomfortable angle. Water now streamed down her left side, soaking through her thin jacket, but she didn't adjust it. Something about the man's weary eyes reminded her of her father, the same dignified exhaustion, the weight of responsibilities unseen. "Where are you headed?" he asked finally, glancing down at her. Maylene hesitated, searching for the right words. "Green Street," she managed. "Work at Golden Dragon." "That's quite a walk from here," she shrugged. "Is okay. I walk every day." Another silence settled between them, broken only by the splash of their footsteps and the constant rhythm of rain against umbrella. The man cleared his throat. "I'm Robert Chen," he said. "Immigration attorney." Maylene's heart stuttered in her chest. "Immigration attorney." The words echoed in her mind, stirring a forgotten hope. How many nights had she lain awake, calculating how many more months of savings she would need to afford legal help with her family's paperwork? "I'm Maylene," she replied carefully. Her fingers tightened around the umbrella handle. "From China." He nodded, as if he'd already guessed. "How long have you been in the States?" 4 years. The words felt heavy on her tongue, each year a weight she carried. "Come alone. Family still in China." Something shifted in Robert's expression. Professional interest, perhaps, or simple compassion. That must be difficult. Maylene stared ahead, watching raindrops bounce off the pavement. Difficult didn't begin to describe the hollow ache that had become her constant companion, the way she sometimes woke, gasping from dreams of her mother's face, her little brother's laugh, the way she saved every extra dollar, postponing even small comforts, focused solely on bringing them here. "Is life?" she said simply. They turned onto Canal Street, where vendors were hurriedly covering their wares as the storm intensified. The wind whipped between buildings, turning the rain sideways. Maylene struggled to keep the umbrella steady. "Let me," Robert offered, his larger hand closing over hers on the handle. The unexpected warmth of human contact made her start. How long had it been since someone had touched her with such casual kindness? In the restaurant, the other workers kept to themselves, everyone carrying their own stories of separation and struggle. She relinquished the umbrella, watching as he angled it against the wind. Water streamed down his sleeve, but he didn't seem to notice. "You said you work at Golden Dragon?" he asked. "I know that place. Good dumplings." A small smile tugged at Maylene's lips. "I make dumplings. My mother's recipe. Your mother taught you well." His voice softened, and for a moment, they walked in comfortable silence, two strangers connected by nothing more than a small red umbrella and the relentless New York rain. At the next corner, Robert paused. "My office is down this way," he said, gesturing to the right. "Where are you headed?" "Straight." Maylin pointed ahead, then left on green. Robert hesitated, glancing at the umbrella, then at the torrential downpour. "Keep it," he said finally, stepping away. "I'm not far." Maylin shook her head. "Is special. From my mother." She held it firmly between them, her gaze steady despite having to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "We share to my work. I insist." Something like surprise flickered across his face, followed by a slow smile that creased the corners of his eyes. "Your mother would be proud of your kindness," he said quietly. They continued in silence, the space between them now filled with unspoken understanding. Maylin found herself walking more slowly than usual, aware that once they reached the restaurant, this brief connection would dissolve, becoming just another moment in the blur of days that made up her American life. The Golden Dragon came into view all too soon, its red awning bright against the gray afternoon, steam fogging its windows from within. Maylin stopped at the service entrance in the alley, turning to face her unexpected companion. "Thank you," she said, the words inadequate for the comfort his presence had provided. Robert reached into his pocket and extracted a business card, slightly damp at the edges. "If you ever need help with immigration matters," he said, pressing it into her palm. "My office provides pro bono services for select cases. Come see me." Maylin stared at the card, its embossed letters catching the dim light. "Robert Chen, immigration attorney." Her heart raced with sudden wild hope. "Thank you," she whispered again, clutching the card as if it might disappear. Robert smiled, stepping back into the rain. "No, thank you for the umbrella. And the company." He glanced at the restaurant door. "Maybe I'll come by for dumplings sometime." Maylin watched him walk away, his shoulders hunched against the downpour, until he disappeared around the corner. Only then did she tuck the precious card into her pocket and enter the steamy kitchen that had become her second home. She couldn't have known then how that simple act of sharing an umbrella would alter the course of her life. Couldn't have imagined that kindness, like ripples in water, would spread outward in ever-widening circles, eventually bringing back to her all that she had lost. The restaurant kitchen hummed with familiar chaos, the clang of woks, the sizzle of oil, the rapid-fire Mandarin and Cantonese that overlapped into a language entirely its own. Maylin slipped her umbrella into the plastic bucket by the door, hung her wet jacket on a crowded hook, and tied her apron with practiced movements. "You're late, Mrs." Zhang said, not looking up from the vegetables she was chopping with mechanical precision. Her knife moved in a blur, transforming a cucumber into paper-thin slices. "Sorry." "Rain?" Maylin replied, taking her place at the dumpling station. Her fingers were still cold, slightly numb from the walk, but they remembered their work. She began rolling dough into perfect circles, muscle memory taking over while her mind lingered on the unexpected encounter. "Robert Chen, immigration attorney." The business card seemed to burn through her pocket, a small rectangle of possibility. "Maylin, 10 orders of pork dumplings." Mr. Liu's voice cut through her thoughts. She nodded, reaching for the filling she'd prepared that morning. The evening rush swept her into its familiar rhythm. Hours passed in a blur of orders, steam, and the constant motion of her hands folding dumplings with the efficiency that had earned her this position. Yet even as she worked, something had shifted inside her. A door cracked open, allowing in a draft of hope she'd almost forgotten how to feel. At midnight, when the last customer had gone and the kitchen was finally clean, Maylin climbed the 4 flights to her apartment. The rain had stopped, leaving the city streets slick and reflective, mirroring the streetlights like fallen stars. Her room was small, just enough space for a twin bed, a dresser that doubled as a nightstand, and a narrow table where she ate her solitary meals. The bathroom and kitchen were shared with 2 other tenants whom she rarely saw, their schedules perfectly misaligned. The arrangement suited her. After the constant noise and interaction of the restaurant, silence was a luxury. Maylin showered quickly, changed into her threadbare pajamas, and sat cross-legged on her bed. Only then did she remove Robert's card from her pocket, studying it under the harsh overhead light. Robert Chen and Associates, Immigration Law. The address was in downtown Manhattan, not far from the courthouse. There was a phone number, an email, a website, signs of legitimacy that made her pulse quicken. Pro bono services for select cases, he'd said. Maylin knew what pro bono meant: free legal help. She'd researched it months ago, when the frustration of navigating immigration paperwork had reduced her to tears. But everyone she'd contacted had quoted fees that made her stomach sink, amounts that would take years to save. She traced the embossed letters with her fingertip, remembering Robert's kind eyes, the way he'd held the umbrella to shelter her more than himself. There had been something genuine about him, something that didn't feel like the empty promises she'd heard before. From the dresser drawer, she extracted a worn manila folder, her family's immigration paperwork, application forms, official responses, rejection notices. She'd tried sponsoring them as immediate relatives once she received her green card, but there had been complications. Her limited English and inability to afford legal assistance had left her floundering in a bureaucratic maze. Her mother's face smiled up at her from a photograph paperclipped to one document, eyes crinkled at the corners, gray strands beginning to thread through her dark hair. Beside her stood Maylin's father, stoic as always, his hand resting on 12-year-old Wei's shoulder. Her baby brother, not so much a baby anymore. Wei would be 16 now. Sometimes she struggled to imagine how he might have changed, what his voice might sound like deepened by adolescence. The thought sent a familiar pain lancing through her chest. Maylin pressed her palm to the photograph, as if she could reach through the paper and touch them, feel the warmth of their skin, the solid reality of their presence. "Maybe," she whispered to their frozen smiles. "Maybe." She returned the documents to their folder, placing Robert's card carefully on top before sliding the drawer closed. Tomorrow, she decided. Tomorrow she would call. The immigration law office occupied the third floor of an older building in Lower Manhattan. Maylin stood outside for several minutes, gathering courage, her hands smoothing invisible wrinkles from her best blouse. She'd called that morning, half expecting to be brushed off by a secretary, surprised when the receptionist had offered her an appointment that very afternoon. The lobby was modest but clean, with uncomfortable-looking chairs and framed diplomas on the walls. A young woman sat behind a desk, typing rapidly on a keyboard. "Maylin?" she asked, glancing up with a smile. "Mr. Chen is finishing up with another client. He'll be right with you." Maylin nodded, perching on the edge of a chair, her manila folder clutched tightly in her lap. She'd taken the afternoon off work, forfeiting wages she couldn't afford to lose. Please, she thought, let this not be a waste. 10 minutes later, a door opened and Robert emerged, escorting an elderly couple. He spoke to them in fluent Spanish, his manner gentle and reassuring. The woman clasped his hand between both of hers before leaving, gratitude evident in the gesture. Then he turned, his eyes finding Maylin, recognition warming his features. "The umbrella?" he said, smiling. "I was hoping you'd come." Something about his genuine pleasure at seeing her loosened the knot of anxiety in Maylin's chest. She stood, clutching her folder like a shield. "Please, come in." He gestured toward his office. "Would you like tea? Coffee?" "Tea, please," she managed, following him into a small but comfortable room. Unlike the stark lobby, Robert's office felt lived in. Bookshelves lined one wall, family photos adorned another, and the window overlooked a sliver of park where pigeons gathered on benches. "My assistant makes excellent jasmine tea," he said, pressing an intercom button to request it. "Much better than what I can offer at home, where my wife complains I always make it too weak or too strong, never just right." He was putting her at ease, Maylin realized, creating small talk to help her relax. She appreciated the effort, though her eyes kept drifting to the framed credentials behind his desk, searching for reassurance that he was qualified, that this hope wasn't misplaced. "Now," he said once they were seated, tea steaming between them, "tell me about your situation." Maylin took a deep breath and began the story she'd rehearsed all morning. She explained how she'd come to America on a work visa, eventually obtaining permanent residency. How she'd been trying to sponsor her parents and younger brother to join her, but had encountered multiple complications. "The last letter," she said, extracting it from her folder, "say application incomplete. But I send everything they ask." Her frustration was evident even through her careful English. "I say for lawyer, but so expensive." Robert studied the rejection notice, his expression thoughtful. "May I see the rest of your paperwork?" Maylin handed over the folder, watching anxiously as he leafed through the documents, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. The neat stack of papers represented years of effort, thousands of dollars in fees, and countless hours deciphering legal language that might as well have been written in hieroglyphics. "Your brother's case is straightforward," Robert said finally. "As a minor child of a permanent resident, he falls under the F2A preference category. But your parents are more complicated." He tapped his pen against a particular form. "There's a mistake here in how their relationship to you was classified. And these supporting documents aren't exactly what USCIS is looking for." Hope and despair warred in Maylin's chest. "Can be fixed?" Robert looked up, his gaze steady and direct. "Yes, I believe so. But it will take time, and there will be additional documentation needed from your family in China." "How much?" Maylin asked, the inevitable question that had been hovering behind every word. "How much it cost?" Something softened in Robert's expression. Normally, a case like this would run about $5,000. He held up a hand when he saw her face fall. "But I mentioned pro bono services, and I meant it." Maylin's breath caught. "Why?" she asked, the word barely audible. "Why help me?" Robert set down his pen, considering her question with the seriousness it deserved. "2 reasons," he said finally. "First, your case is exactly the type our firm takes on pro bono, family reunification where there's clear eligibility but bureaucratic barriers." He paused, a slight smile touching his lips. "And second, not many people would share their umbrella with a stranger on a rainy day, especially when they had so little shelter to spare themselves." Tears pricked at the corners of Maylin's eyes. She blinked rapidly, unwilling to cry in front of this man who was offering her the first real chance she'd had in 4 years. "I cannot pay," she said, needing to be absolutely clear. "Not 5,000. Maybe little by little over time." "That's not necessary," Robert assured her. "But there is something you could do for me." He reached for a different folder on his desk. "I have several Chinese clients who speak limited English. If you could help with translation occasionally, particularly for our elderly clients from Fujian province, that would be more valuable than money." Maylin nodded, relief washing through her in a dizzying wave. "I can translate. My English not perfect, but I try hard." "Your English is better than you think," Robert said. "And it will improve with practice." He began explaining what documents they would need to obtain from China, what forms needed to be refiled, the likely timeline they were facing. As he spoke, Maylin felt something unfurling inside her chest, a cautious bloom of possibility. For the first time in years, the distance between her and her family seemed less like an unbridgeable chasm and more like a difficult path with an actual end in sight. "Thank you," she said when he finally finished. The words felt shallow, inadequate for the depth of her gratitude. Robert smiled. "You can thank me when your family arrives. Now let's get started." Autumn faded into winter, and winter reluctantly gave way to spring. Maylin continued her work at the Golden Dragon, but now 2 evenings a week were spent at Robert's office, helping with translations and meticulously preparing documents for her family's case. The work was slow, often frustrating. There were forms to be notarized in China, official records to be translated and certified, interviews to be scheduled at the American consulate in Guangzhou. Each step forward seemed to reveal 2 more hurdles ahead. Yet for the first time in years, Maylin allowed herself to hope. She began making small changes to her apartment, buying a proper dining table that could seat 4, adding a fold-out couch where Wei could sleep. She started keeping a list in a small notebook, things to show her family when they arrived. The Brooklyn Bridge at sunset, the rowboats in Central Park, the best dumpling shop in Chinatown, not Golden Dragon, though she would never admit that to her employers. Robert became more than just her attorney. He was her guide through the bewildering process, her advocate when bureaucracy threatened to overwhelm, and gradually, her friend. She met his wife Alice, a pediatrician with a laugh that filled rooms, and their teenage daughter Lily, who was learning Mandarin in school and practiced with Maylin. "Your accent's getting better?" Maylin told Lily one evening when the girl had come to the office after school. "But your tones on May and May still need work." Lily groaned dramatically. "Why does buy and sell have to sound so similar? It's like Chinese was designed specifically to embarrass American students." Maylin laughed, the sound surprising her. Laughter had become less rare these days. In English, read is present tense and read is past tense, but they look exactly same. Every language has its tricks. From his desk, Robert watched their exchange with a small smile. The change in Maylin over the past months had been remarkable. The nervous woman who had first entered his office, clutching her documents like lifelines, had gradually unfurled, revealing a sharp intelligence, dry humor, and a resilience that continually impressed him. "How's the I-130 coming along?" he asked, referring to the petition for alien relative they'd been struggling with. Mei-Lin's expression sobered. "Almost ready. Just need one more document from Fuzhou." She returned to the form she'd been checking, her posture tightening almost imperceptibly. Robert recognized the tension. "You heard from them recently?" "Yesterday." Mei-Lin kept her eyes on the document. "My father not well. Doctor says his heart." She trailed off, her finger tracing the edge of the paper. "We need to hurry." Robert nodded, understanding the weight beneath her simple words. Time was never on their side in immigration cases, but now the stakes felt even higher. "I'll call Senator Martinez's office again tomorrow," he said. "Her staff has been helpful with expediting similar cases." Mei-Lin looked up, gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you." These were the moments that reminded Robert why he'd chosen this field of law, not for wealth or prestige, but for the chance to help reunite families torn apart by borders and bureaucracy. In Mei-Lin, he saw echoes of his own parents' struggle to bring relatives from Taiwan decades earlier. The office phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. He answered, his expression shifting as he listened to the caller. "Yes, she's here," he said, glancing at Mei-Lin. "We can be there in 20 minutes. He hung up and immediately began gathering papers from his desk. That was the USCIS office. "There's been a development in your case, and they want to see us right away." Mei-Lin felt her heart drop. In her experience, unexpected developments were rarely good news. "Problem?" she asked, already mentally preparing for another setback. "They wouldn't say," Robert replied, his voice carefully neutral. "But they specifically asked for both of us to come in person." The subway ride downtown passed in tense silence. Mei-Lin stared at her reflection in the train window, her mind racing through possibilities. Perhaps they'd found an issue with one of the documents. Perhaps there was a security concern. Perhaps her father's medical condition wasn't considered serious enough to expedite the process. Beside her, Robert reviewed files on his tablet, occasionally making notes. His calm professionalism steadied her, a reminder that whatever news awaited, she wouldn't face it alone. The USCIS office was nearly empty when they arrived. Most of the day's appointments concluded. A clerk led them to a small conference room where a middle-aged woman in a navy suit waited, a thick file open before her. "Ms. Zhang, Mr. Chen, thank you for coming on such short notice," she said, gesturing for them to sit. "I'm Officer Patel. I've been reviewing your family's case." Mei-Lin perched on the edge of her chair, hands folded tightly in her lap. Officer Patel adjusted her glasses. "I understand you've been trying to bring your parents and brother to the United States for over 4 years now." "Yes." Mei-Lin nodded, her mouth dry. "My father is ill. We hope process can be faster." "That's actually why I called you in today." Officer Patel extracted several documents from the file. "We've received the medical documentation from your father's physician in China, and after review, we believe this case qualifies for humanitarian consideration." Robert leaned forward. "You're expediting the application?" "More than that," Officer Patel said. "We're granting humanitarian parole for your parents and brother, Mrs. Zhang. This will allow them to enter the United States while their permanent residency applications are being processed." The words hung in the air for a moment before their meaning penetrated Mei-Lin's consciousness. "They can come now?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Once the paperwork is processed, yes. Likely within the next 4 to 6 weeks." Mei-Lin's vision blurred. Her hands, still tightly clasped, began to tremble. 4 to 6 weeks. After 4 years of separation, 4 years of longing and uncertainty, her family could be here in little more than a month. "There will be conditions," Officer Patel continued, explaining the limitations of humanitarian parole, the ongoing requirements, the next steps in the process. Robert asked questions, took notes, requested clarifications, handling all the practical matters while Mei-Lin sat in stunned silence, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. She would see her father before his condition worsened. She would hear her mother's laugh again, not just through a crackling phone connection. She would discover how tall Wei had grown, what music he liked now, whether he still bit his lip when concentrating, all the small details of her brother's life that had been lost to distance. "Ms. Zhang?" Officer Patel's voice broke through her thoughts. "Do you understand the conditions I've outlined?" Mei-Lin nodded, quickly wiping her tears. "Yes, thank you." Thank you so much. Outside the USCIS building, the spring evening was mild, cherry blossoms drifting on the breeze. Maylin stood motionless on the sidewalk, still processing the news, while Robert made a quick phone call. Alice wants to know if you'll join us for dinner to celebrate, he said, putting away his phone. Lily's making her famous terrible fried rice. A laugh bubbled up from somewhere deep in Maylin's chest. How can I say no to terrible fried rice? You can't. It's a once-in-a-lifetime culinary experience. His expression softened. Though I should warn you, there might be a few other people there. Alice may have already called half our friends. Maylin shook her head in wonder. Why everyone so kind to me? I just stranger who share umbrella. Robert considered this, hands in his pockets. Maybe that's exactly why, he said finally. In a city where most people hurry past each other, you stopped to offer shelter. Small kindnesses matter, Maylin. They remind us we're connected. As they walked toward the subway, Maylin thought about connections, how a single moment in the rain had led her here, how one act of sharing had set in motion a chain of events that would finally bring her family across oceans. Above them, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, the same stars that shone over Fuzhou, where her parents and brother would soon be preparing for a journey they'd almost stopped believing possible. 6 weeks, she whispered, tasting the miraculous brevity of it. 6 weeks. The airport arrival area buzzed with anticipation. Maylin stood clutching a handmade sign, Zhang family, her heart pounding so hard she felt slightly dizzy. Robert and Alice waited nearby, giving her space while remaining close enough for support. Their flight landed, Robert said, checking the arrivals board. Should be through customs in about 30 minutes. 30 minutes. After years of separation, merely 30 minutes remained. Maylin smoothed her new dress, a simple blue one she'd splurged on for this occasion, and mentally reviewed the Chinese phrases she hadn't spoken aloud in so long. Would her family notice her accent had changed? Would they see the ways America had reshaped her? You okay? Alice asked gently, touching her arm. Maylin nodded, unable to form words around the emotion clogging her throat. She was beyond okay. She was standing at the threshold of a moment she'd visualized thousands of times, a reunion that had sustained her through countless lonely nights. The minutes crawled by. Travelers emerged in waves from the customs area, reuniting with waiting friends and family in embraces that now held new meaning for Maylin. Each tearful reunion she witnessed was a preview of her own imminent joy. And then there they were. Her father appeared first, thinner than she remembered, leaning slightly on a cane. Her mother followed, her hair now completely gray but her posture still straight, proud. And behind them, almost unrecognizable, was Wei, no longer the child of her memory, but a young man nearly as tall as their father. For an eternal moment, Maylin couldn't move. They hadn't noticed her yet, their eyes scanning the crowd, searching. Then Wei spotted her sign. He nudged their mother, pointed. Their gazes found her simultaneously. Time seemed to stop, then accelerate. Maylin was running, the sign forgotten, dropped somewhere behind her. Her mother broke away from the group, arms outstretched, her face transformed by joy. They collided in the middle of the terminal, Maylin enveloped in her mother's embrace, the familiar scent of jasmine soap and home overwhelming her senses. Her father reached them seconds later, one arm around her, the other still gripping his cane. And Wei, her little brother not so little anymore, wrapped his long arms around all of them, completing the circle. They stood locked together, oblivious to the bustling airport around them, to the curious glances of passing travelers, to everything except the miracle of being whole again. Maylin felt her mother's tears dampening her shoulder, heard her father's ragged breathing, felt Wei's shoulders shaking with emotion. I missed you, she whispered in Mandarin, the words utterly inadequate. Every day, every minute, my daughter, her mother replied, cupping Maylin's face between weathered hands. My brave, beautiful daughter. Her father simply held her gaze, his eyes saying what his reserved nature wouldn't allow his lips to express. But Wei had no such restraint. The apartment better have good internet, he announced in English, his accent thick but his grammar perfect. I have 4 years of American video games to catch up on. The unexpected comment broke the emotional tension, sending them all into tear-streaked laughter. Maylin ruffled his hair, an old habit that now required her to reach up instead of down. When did you get so tall? She demanded. And when did you learn English? Wei grinned, the familiar expression on his changed face bringing a fresh wave of emotion. Online? I've been practicing to surprise you. Robert and Alice approached cautiously, not wanting to intrude on the family moment. Maylin turned, suddenly remembering their presence. "This is Robert," she said in Mandarin to her family, then switched to English for Robert and Alice's benefit. "The lawyer I told you about? The one who helped bring you here? And his wife Alice." Her father straightened, his dignity evident despite his obvious fatigue. He bowed slightly to Robert. "Thank you," he said in halting English. "Thank you for helping my daughter." "It was my honor," Robert replied. He didn't mention the umbrella, the rainy day that had started everything. He didn't need to. The connection between that moment and this one hung in the air between them, understood without words. As they gathered luggage and made their way toward the exit, Maylin found herself walking between worlds, her past and her present, merging into a future she had almost stopped believing possible. Outside, the New York summer evening was warm, the sky streaked with sunset colors. "So big," her mother murmured, gazing up at the airport architecture, the vastness of the parking structure, the stream of yellow taxis. "Everything's so big. Wait until you see Manhattan," Maylin said, squeezing her hand. The buildings touched the clouds. They piled into Robert's car, luggage tetraced into the trunk, Way's lanky frame folded somewhat awkwardly into the third row. As they pulled away from the airport, Maylin watched her family's faces, memorizing their expressions as they took in their first glimpses of America. Her father's quiet assessment, her mother's wide-eyed wonder, Way's barely contained excitement. And something else beneath it all, the shadow of uncertainties that lay ahead, the challenges of adjustment, of health concerns, of rebuilding lives in an unfamiliar place. But for now, in this car, with the people she loved most in the world breathing the same air for the first time in 4 years, those challenges could wait. This moment, this perfect, improbable moment, was enough. Maylin caught Robert's eye in the rearview mirror. He smiled, a small nod acknowledging the magnitude of what had transpired. How a single act of kindness on a rainy day had set in motion events that would forever alter multiple lives. Her mother, noticing the exchange, leaned close to whisper, "Your friend, he is a good man." "Yes," Maylin agreed, watching the New York skyline emerge on the horizon, a glittering promise of new beginnings. "I shared my umbrella with him once and he helped bring you to me." Her mother's brow furrowed in confusion, but Maylin just smiled, reaching for her hand. There would be time for the whole story later. Years of time stretching before them like an open road. For now, it was enough to be together, heading home. 1 year later, the red umbrella hung by the door of the Zhang family's new apartment in Queens, a 3-bedroom unit in a building with several other Chinese immigrant families. No longer used for its original purpose, it had become something of a family talisman, a symbol of the journey that had brought them together again. Maylin straightened it as she passed, a habitual gesture before checking her watch. The dinner guests would arrive soon, and there was still much to prepare. In the kitchen, her mother orchestrated a symphony of traditional dishes, the aromas of home filling every corner of the apartment. Her father sat at the dining table, carefully writing out Chinese calligraphy for the occasion. Celebration of new beginnings, the characters flowing from his brush with practiced precision. "Wait! Set the table, please." Maylin called toward the bedroom where her brother was undoubtedly glued to his computer. 5 minutes, came the predictable response. Maylin smiled, shaking her head. Some things never changed, even across continents. Wei had adapted to American high school with remarkable speed, his English now better than hers in many ways, his social circle expanding weekly. He'd even started teaching their father to use a smartphone, a project that tested both their patience but brought them closer. The doorbell rang. Maylin smoothed her dress, the same blue one she'd worn to the airport a year ago, and went to answer it. Robert and Alice stood in the hallway, Lily beside them holding a bouquet of flowers. Behind them were several other guests, fellow immigrants Maylin had helped through her volunteer work at Robert's office, neighbors who had welcomed the Zhang family to the building, friends made along the way. Come in, come in." She ushered them inside, accepting Alice's warm hug and Lily's enthusiastic greeting in increasingly confident Mandarin. Robert handed her a bottle of wine. "Happy anniversary," he said quietly. 1 year since the airport reunion. 1 year of rebuilding family bonds, of helping her parents navigate American systems, of watching her father's health improve with proper medical care. 1 year of translating for other immigrants at Robert's office, her role there evolving from client to valuable team member. Hard to believe it's been a year, Mei Lin replied, leading them into the living room where her father rose to greet them with newfound steadiness, his cane now rarely needed. The apartment filled quickly with guests and conversation, a blend of languages and laughter that warmed Mei Lin more than any summer day. Her mother emerged from the kitchen, proudly bearing platters of food that were received with appropriate exclamations of delight. As they gathered around the table, expanded with a folding extension to accommodate everyone, Mei Lin felt a swell of emotion that momentarily stole her breath. This scene, this moment of connection and community, had once seemed as impossible as touching the stars. Robert raised his glass. "I'd like to propose a toast," he said, his voice quieting the cheerful chatter, "to the Zhang family who have taught us all something about perseverance, about hope, and about the power of small kindnesses." "To the Zhangs," everyone echoed, glasses lifting. Mei Lin's father cleared his throat, pushing himself to stand. His English was still limited, but he had practiced this moment. "We thank you," he said carefully, each word measured and precise, "for helping our daughter, for welcoming our family. America is now home because of good people like you." Mei Lin translated the rest of his speech for those who didn't understand Mandarin, his gratitude to the doctors who had treated his heart condition, his pride in Wei's academic achievements, his appreciation for the neighbors who had helped them navigate everything from subway maps to supermarkets. As the meal progressed, conversations flowed around Mei Lin like currents in a river. Her mother exchanged recipes with Alice. Wei and Lily debated the merits of different video games with another teenager from the building. Her father discussed traditional Chinese medicine with an elderly neighbor, their hands sketching explanations where shared vocabulary failed. Mei Lin slipped away briefly to the kitchen for another pitcher of water. Robert followed, helping her fill it at the sink. "Your family has settled in remarkably well," he observed. "Your father especially. He seems transformed from the man who arrived a year ago." Mei Lin nodded, watching the water rise in the pitcher. "The doctors say his heart is much stronger, but I think it is not just medicine that healed him." She gestured toward the living room, where laughter erupted over something Wei had said. "It is this, being together, having purpose." Robert leaned against the counter. "And you? How are you finding your new role at the office?" After months of volunteer translation work, Mei Lin had recently accepted a paid position as a community liaison at Robert's firm, helping other immigrants navigate the system she had once found so bewildering. "I like helping people find their way," she said simply. "I understand their fear, their hope. Sometimes all they need is someone who speaks their language, not just words, but experience." Through the kitchen doorway, she could see her mother demonstrating a technique for wrapping dumplings to Alice and Lily, her hands moving with the practiced grace that Mei Lin had inherited. Wei was teaching one of the neighbor boys a handshake he'd learned at school. Her father, animated in a way she'd rarely seen before their reunion, was showing his calligraphy to an admiring guest. These ordinary moments, family and friends sharing food and conversation, were the very treasures she had longed for during those solitary years. The simple miracle of daily life together. "I've been meaning to ask you something," Robert said, interrupting her thoughts. "That umbrella by your door, is that the same one from the day we met?" Mei Lin smiled. "Yes. My mother brought it from China when I left home. Now it stays here to remind us." "Remind you of what?" She considered the question, searching for words to express what the faded red umbrella had come to symbolize. "That sometimes when you offer shelter to someone else, you find your way home." Robert nodded, understanding in his eyes. "A small kindness that changed everything." "Not so small to me," Mei Lin said softly. They returned to the dining room, where Wei was now regaling the guests with an exaggerated account of his first day at American school, complete with comical misunderstandings and cultural confusions. Her mother caught Mei Lin's eye across the table, a look passing between them that contained volumes: gratitude, love, the shared knowledge of how precious this ordinary happiness truly was. Later, when the guests had gone and the family sat together in the quiet aftermath, Mei Lin's mother took her hand. "You made good life here," she said in Mandarin, her voice thick with emotion. "Better than we hoped. We made it together," Mei Lin corrected gently. "And it's only beginning." Outside the window, the lights of Queens twinkled against the night sky. Somewhere in the city, other families were being separated by circumstances. Other immigrants were navigating complex systems alone. Other umbrellas were being shared in moments of unexpected connection. Maylin thought of the newcomers she would help tomorrow at Robert's office, a Syrian family, a Haitian mother, a Guatemalan grandfather, each with their own story, their own journey, their own longing for reunion. She couldn't solve every problem or reunite every family, but she could offer what had once been offered to her, guidance through a confusing system, understanding born of shared experience, and the simple human recognition that said, "You are not alone in the rain." It was enough. It had to be enough. And sometimes, as her own life had shown, it was everything.